The rain started slowly, just a few drops at first. Barely anything. The kind of rain people look up at, hold out their hand to feel, and then go right back to what they were doing. But this rain was different, because somewhere outside a city that had forgotten God completely, on a dry hillside that had never seen a single cloud worth worrying about, a man was standing in front of the most ridiculous thing anyone had ever built, a boat. Not at a harbor, not near a river, not close to any body of water anyone could see, just a boat, enormous, sitting on dry land, taking years to build. And now the man who built it was watching the sky with an expression nobody around him had thought to imitate. The crowds had been laughing at Noah for 100 years. Today they stopped laughing. Because here is the question that changes everything about this story. What if God looked at what he had made and felt something he had never felt before? What if the God who called creation good looked at it again and felt grief so deep that he decided to press reset on everything? And what if the only man he trusted to carry the future of humanity through what was coming was a man most of the world thought was completely out of his mind? This is Noah, and this is the most catastrophic and the most merciful story in the entire Bible. Before we go any further, if this story is already gripping you, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Biblical Secret Revealed so you never miss what we put out next. Drop in the comments right now and type, "I stayed till the end." We read every single one. Now let us go back to the beginning of everything. To understand why the flood happened, you have to understand what the earth had become. Genesis chapter 6 does not soften the description. It says, the earth was corrupt in the sight of God. It says, the earth was filled with violence. Every direction you looked, every city, every village, every road between them. Violence had become the defining characteristic of human civilization. But it goes even deeper than that. Genesis 6 although references the Nephilim, giants, mighty warriors of old, men of renown. The text describes the sons of God taking wives from among the daughters of men and producing offspring of unusual power and size. Whatever the Nephilim were exactly, scholars have debated for centuries. But what the text makes clear is that something had gone profoundly wrong with humanity at every level. Spiritually, morally, physically. The corruption was complete. And then comes one of the most striking sentences in the entire Bible. Genesis 6, verse 6. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. God's heart was troubled. The God who spoke galaxies into existence, who separated the waters and filled the land with living things and called it good. That God looked at what humanity had become and felt something the Bible can only describe as grief. The decision that followed was catastrophic in its completeness. He would wipe the slate, return the waters, undo the separation of water and land he had created, take everything back to the beginning and start again. But not everything. Genesis 6, verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And that one verse is the reason any of us are here. Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. He had a wife whose name the Bible never gives us, but whose courage this story cannot be told without. And one day, God spoke to him. What that moment felt like, we can only imagine. But the message was clear. The earth was ending. Everything that breathed would be destroyed. And Noah had been chosen to carry forward the future of creation. The assignment that followed was specific to a degree that leaves no room for approximation. Build an ark, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. By modern estimates, that is roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The equivalent of a 4-story building, the length of 1.5 football fields. Make it out of cypress wood, coated inside and outside with pitch, 3 decks, a door in the side, a roof with an opening of 1 cubit for light. Noah had never built anything like this. Nobody had, because nothing like this had ever been needed before. And then God told him why. Water was coming, from above and from below, a flood that would cover the face of the entire earth. Every living thing outside the ark would die. His job was to bring his family inside, and 2 of every kind of living creature, male and female, to keep them alive through what was coming. 7 pairs of every clean animal, 2 of every unclean animal, 7 pairs of every bird. The logistics alone are enough to paralyze any reasonable person. The sheer physical impossibility of what God was describing would have broken most people in the first 10 minutes of receiving the instructions. But Genesis chapter 6 verse 22 says something so quiet it is easy to miss. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Not most of it, not the parts he understood. Everything. That sentence is the foundation of the entire story. Noah did not argue. He did not negotiate. He did not wait for the flood to show up before he decided to believe it was coming. He heard the word of God, and he moved. But here is what we need to understand about what that obedience actually cost. The people around Noah had not heard from God. They had only seen a man doing something nobody had ever done for a reason nobody understood. And they watched him for 100 years, building, day after day, decade after decade, in full view of everyone. The mockery would not have been gentle, not for a month, not for a year, for 100 years. And Noah kept building. Try to feel the weight of 100 years. Noah started building the ark in a world where the mockery was fresh, where the laughter was new, where the neighbors who shook their heads were still young enough to shake them with energy. 100 years later, those same neighbors were old men and women, and Noah was still building. The ark was not a weekend project. It was not a season of obedience. It was a life's work, a multi-generational commitment to a promise God had made and a flood that had not yet arrived. His sons grew up on that building site. They learned to cut cypress wood before they learned much else. They watched their father believe for decades without any visible evidence that his belief was right. And they believed with him. Then something happened that changed the atmosphere around the ark. The animals came. Not because Noah rounded them up. Not because his family spent months traveling the earth capturing 2 of every creature. Genesis 7 says the animals came to Noah. They came to him. 2 by 2 they moved toward the ark from wherever they were. God sent them. And when the animals started arriving, the mockery must have shifted into something else. Because you can laugh at a man building a boat on dry land. It is much harder to laugh at a world full of animals walking calmly toward it. Then, Genesis chapter 7, verse 4. God spoke to Noah again, 7 more days. In 7 days, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. 7 days. After 100 years of building and waiting and being laughed at, Noah had 7 days left. And then it began. Genesis 7, verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The water did not come from above alone. The ground itself broke open. Springs from deep within the earth erupting upward at the same moment the sky opened. This was not weather. This was the reversal of creation. The waters God had separated in Genesis chapter 1 were returning, and the people outside who had been laughing ran for higher ground. Noah and his wife, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, their wives, and every creature that had walked through the door of the ark. They were inside. And then Genesis chapter 7 verse 16 records one of the most significant details in the entire account. God shut the door. Not Noah, not his sons. God shut the door of the ark from the outside. That detail carries enormous weight. Whatever was on the outside of that door, when God closed it, was not going to be opened by human decision or human guilt or human second thoughts. The door was shut. The ark was sealed. And the distinction between inside and outside had been made permanent.
Inside the ark, the sound must have been overwhelming. The rain hitting the wooden roof like nothing they had ever heard. The animals responding to the storm with every sound creatures make when they are afraid. The wood of the ark groaning and flexing as the water rose around it. The voices of Noah's family trying to hear each other above everything. And outside, rising water. 40 days and 40 nights the rain fell without stopping. And not just rain. The deep broke open beneath them. The water came from below and above simultaneously. It rose past the walls of houses, past the rooftops, up the hillsides, past the trees on the higher ground.
Genesis 7 verse 19. The water rose so high on the earth that all the high mountains under the entire sky were covered. The mountains, every mountain on earth, covered by water. And the ark floated on the surface of it all. Inside that wooden vessel, Noah's family was not in a comfortable situation. This was not a cruise. The ark had no sail, no rudder, no way to steer. It went where the water took it. The storm outside was violent enough to cover every mountain on earth. The people inside the ark felt every moment of it, and yet the ark held. Genesis 7 verse 24 tells us the waters rose for 150 days. 150 days. No horizon, no land, no sign of anything except water in every direction, and the sky above and the wooden walls around them. Think about what that does to a person. Noah had believed for 100 years. He had built while people laughed. He had entered the ark in obedience before a single drop fell. He had watched God shut the door with his own family on the inside. But 150 days of floating with no visible end would test any faith ever built. The animals needed feeding every day. The waste needed managing. The space inside the ark, though enormous by any ancient standard, was still a closed wooden container in the middle of an infinite ocean. And the silence of God during those days is something the text does not explain. It simply records the waiting. When the rain stopped after 40 days, the ark was still floating on water that showed no sign of receding. The storm had ended, but the world was still gone. Then came the first test. Noah opened the window of the ark and sent out a raven. Ravens are strong birds. They fly far. They do not need to land. The raven went out, and it kept going back and forth until the water dried up. It gave Noah nothing to work with. So he sent a dove. Genesis 8 verse 9. But the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took it and brought it back to himself in the ark. No land. The dove came back because there was nowhere to go. And here is the question that must have pressed down on every person inside that ark during those days. Did God forget us? It sounds almost unthinkable. After everything God had done, after the personal instruction, after the 100 years of building, after the door God had closed with his own intention, after surviving the flood that destroyed everything else. Did God forget? The Bible does not shame the question. It answers it. Genesis chapter 8 verse 1. But God remembered Noah. 3 words that carry the entire weight of the story. God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. God remembered. Not in the way we forget and then recall something. In the Hebrew understanding of divine remembrance, when God remembers, it means He is acting. God's remembering is not a mental event. It is a physical intervention. When God remembered Noah, the water started going down. The springs of the deep were closed. The floodgates of the sky were shut. The wind moved across the water, and the water began to recede. 7 days after the first dove returned with nothing, Noah sent it again. This time, it came back with something. A freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak. An olive leaf. After 150 days of water, and 40 days of rain, and weeks of waiting, and 2 failed tests, a small bird came back to Noah's hand, carrying a green leaf from an olive tree. The olive tree had survived. Something had broken the surface of the water somewhere. Something was growing. Life was coming back. And inside the ark, something shifted. We do not know exactly what was said. We do not have a record of what happened in that moment when Noah held that dove with the olive leaf. But Genesis 8 verse 12 tells us that after 7 more days, he sent the dove out again. And this time it did not return. It had found somewhere to land. The earth was coming back. And in that moment, every relationship inside the ark deepened. Every conversation between Noah and his wife, between sons and fathers, between husbands and wives. The people who had entered the ark as a family were becoming something more than that. They were becoming survivors, witnesses, carriers of the future. They had come through the deepest darkness of the story together, and God had remembered.
The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Genesis 8 verse 4. The 17th day of the 7th month. After all that water, after all that floating, the massive wooden vessel found solid ground and stopped moving. The sound of the ark settling onto the mountain must have been unlike anything they had ever heard. After months of constant motion, stillness, but they did not leave immediately. Noah waited. He removed the covering of the ark and looked out. The surface of the ground was drying, but he waited. And he sent birds, and he tested, and he waited more. Genesis 8, verse 15. Then God spoke to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, every creature that moves along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it. Come out." After more than a year inside the ark, God gave the command to step outside, and Noah opened the door. The procession out of the ark must have been one of the most extraordinary moments in human history. 8 people stepping onto a mountain in a world that had been completely reshaped by water. Everything they had known was gone. Every city, every road, every person they had ever known outside of that wooden vessel, gone. But the earth was there, wet and raw and emptied and silent. The mountains under their feet were real. The air was different. The sky above them was clear. And behind them, a world full of animals following them out into a new creation. Every creature, 2 by 2. Every bird lifting from the opening of the ark into a sky it had not seen for over a year. Every animal stepping onto ground that had been washed clean of everything that had been before. The earth was beginning again, and Noah stood in the middle of all of it. The first thing Noah did when he stepped onto the new earth was not look around. It was not set up camp. It was not divide the land. It was not begin planning for what came next. The first thing Noah did was build an altar. Genesis 8, verse 20. Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, He sacrificed burnt offerings on it. After everything, after 100 years of obedience, after the ark and the flood and the darkness and the waiting and the dove and the olive leaf and the coming to rest on Ararat, after stepping out into a world that had been emptied and remade, the first act was worship.
And God responded to that worship with something the world had never seen before. Genesis 8, verse 21. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done." God made a promise in response to Noah's worship, and then he gave it a sign. Genesis 9, verse 13. "I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth." A rainbow, every color of light refracted through water in the sky, visible to both God and every living creature. A sign that cannot be manufactured or controlled or taken down. A sign that appears in exactly the conditions that remind the earth of what happened and promises it will not happen again. Not because humanity would not deserve it again. God himself says in the same passage that the inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. The flood did not fix human nature. God knew that. The rainbow is not a sign that humanity got better. It is a sign of God's mercy in the face of humanity staying exactly what it is. And every time it rains, every single time clouds gather and water falls from the sky, somewhere in that sky, there is the possibility of a rainbow, a visible reminder that God made a promise and that he keeps it. Now here is the part of Noah's story that most people rush past or skip entirely. Because after the altar and the rainbow and the promise and the new beginning, Noah planted a vineyard. He grew grapes. He made wine. And Genesis 9, verse 21 says, "He drank the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent." The man who walked with God for 100 years while the world laughed. The man who built the ark and gathered the animals and trusted God through 150 days of water with no visible end. The man who built the first altar on the new earth and received the covenant of the rainbow. He got drunk and passed out in his tent. And what followed was a family rupture that sent shockwaves through the next 3 generations of humanity. His son Ham saw his father's nakedness and told his brothers about it rather than covering it. Shem and Japheth walked in backward and covered their father without looking. When Noah woke and understood what had happened, he pronounced judgment on Ham's son Canaan and blessing on Shem and Japheth. Why is this in the Bible? Because the Bible is not interested in producing heroes. It is interested in producing truth. Noah was genuinely one of the most obedient and faithful people who ever lived. His righteousness in the context of his generation was extraordinary. God himself called him righteous, blameless among the people of his time. And he still carried the same broken human nature as everyone else. The flood did not purify Noah. It preserved him. But the thing that needed purifying was something water could not reach. The story of Noah's failure at the end of his life is not there to diminish him. It is there to remind us that the hope of the story was never really about Noah. It was always about the God who chose him, the mercy that preserved him, the covenant that did not depend on Noah staying perfect. Grace does not require a perfect recipient. It only requires a God willing to give it. And this God was. God remembered Noah. He remembers you. Hold on.